and let me just speak to attendance kind of the start. So there was so I had counted on the money game. I had counted all the money. I had counted the number of packets of money because that's key to us, how we calculate the data and how we know what's going on with the answers. And 46 packets of money were taken, but only 40 persons participated in the actual activity. It does seem that there's varying amounts of participation in the continuums with the dots, some pushing up around 50s, some being down in the 30s. So I think it's evident across all of the items that people, participated in some, not maybe all, and so forth. That being said, as I already said previously, very pleased with the outcome or the turnout, considering it's April. It's August, going back in time here. So I just want to run through kind of our review of what the activities told us, and also probably get some thoughts from you guys. So at the end of the day, the continuums of place, the 7 of them, is Thompsonville a good place to live? To be honest with you, this was a more positive answer than I had anticipated, with many kind of middling and then leaning towards the better half of it. The most interesting answer, or the most blatant answer, is, question 2: does Thompsonville need to improve? As I say there on the right-hand side, out of the 9 questions in this activity, if there was consensus on any, it's this one. I do keep on wondering, actually, who was this person? I really want to know who that was. But the fact is, there's definitely this consensus that there's a need for improvement in Thompsonville. Do you want more or less development in Thompsonville? And this one kind of surprised me too, in that it was more. Throughout this process, you guys are kind of development averse as a community. And so I was surprised to see this leaning towards more. But that being said, I'm kind of equating it to the question above, and that maybe people are viewing development as a means of improvement. So I think there's probably a relationship in those answers. Question 4: what's more important, residential development or commercial development? And in some ways, this is a neutral response. The majority of answers are in the middle, kind of saying both are important, with then kind of an equal share out at each end. Question 5: what's more important, housing quality or housing affordability? I was glad to see so many land in the middle. I truly believe them as equally important. And I think the answers kind of showed that. But we do have to remember they can be contradictory answers, in the sense that if you improve housing quality, you most likely negatively impact housing affordability. That is, as quality improves, cost increases, and therefore affordability becomes more challenging. What is more important, investment in housing or investment in commercial property? Once again, this is an answer landing mostly in the middle, saying both are important, with a little leaning towards the commercial side. So then question 7: what's more important, providing public transportation via bus or train? Neutral and middling, kind of saying both are important, leaning towards maybe a bit more towards the train. I have to assume, and it was related to another answer somewhere else in all the activities, that I truly think these were likely persons in the neighborhood that are more likely to be using the existing bus service. I don't know that for a fact, but it also kind of matched up with something else that I was reviewing. So what is more important, access to transportation for work or access for affordable childcare? This one really kind of interested me, or got my attention, in the sense that equally divided, kind of in the center and then on both ends, almost equally divided. But the fact was, I expected it more heavily towards transportation and work than more heavily towards affordable childcare, which I think raises, at least to me, the fact that childcare is key, is often key, and it's something that maybe we don't often think about in the context of transportation, in the context of maintaining meaningful employment and so forth. So, what is more pressing issue, crime or housing quality? This answer didn't really surprise me, but I do think a crime question, given the events of the day, is probably a bit skewed. So, I think we have to account for that to some degree. So, my favorite exercise, the investment exercise and the money. So, when we put this together, for those of you that maybe didn't participate in it, there were 9 topics you could invest in, but you only have 6 bills, and that's 150, 120, 210s, 25s. So you have to make some hard choices on where you're putting that 50, especially. By counting the number of packets of money we put out there, we know how many of each of these bills is out there. And therefore, we have a pretty good read on how people voted. So when you look at, or how they invested, ultimately kind of voting on the topics, when you look at parks and public spaces, well, we know basically the numbers all totaled up. There was $4,000 out there. So 40 participants, all these numbers matched as they should. And we know that 45% voted with their largest bill, their 50, on parks and public spaces. And that was the most 50s in any location. And then we also know that 12 20s, the largest amount of 20s placed on any topic, also landed in parks and public spaces. So it doesn't only kind of win in total dollars, it also wins in kind of total top priority votes. It's bar none the most important priority that people identified. Commercial development falls in behind, with housing quality falling in next. You can see the big gap here, though, from the money placed on parks versus second place with commercial development. And then we go paring down, and these numbers get pretty low pretty quick. Now, part of that is the 50s, that most of the 50s were placed into here, or many. But the numbers get pretty low pretty quick. Worthy of notation is housing development, ranked down at 7. This just further confirms, throughout this process, I've kind of picked on you guys or given you guys a hard time, but there's an aversion to new housing in Enfield. For better or worse, like it or not, it is a recurring theme that plays out in all of these. The reason why I italicize job opportunities, because I know there's a skewing factor in here. I watched the person throw all $100 of their money into that bin. They left the paper clip on it, so it was there when we counted. So that means this would drop to 200. It wouldn't have a 50, and it would only have 420s. So that one, I know there was an actual bit of a skewing on it. The voted here, basically, we know all 40 people voted on this one. On the rest of them, we can estimate, because of the dual bills, we don't know if someone threw in 2 5s or 2 10s, but low of 22, high of 31, and that's for each of them. That's giving us the low total, and that's giving us the high total. What it shows is, the highest ranked received the highest potential vote totals. The numbers kind of match out and so forth. So good participation in this activity. I think it's informative. And be honest with you, the idea of parks and public spaces, housing quality, commercial development are reaffirmed in other activities as we go through this. And that's one of the things I like about these different activities, is they can reaffirm each other. Sometimes they don't, but they were definitely reaffirmed here. The Thompsonville train station amenities, I didn't know what to expect with the answers on this one. But I think the three that were kind of the three tops, the cafe, the Wi-Fi with public access, and bike racks, I think are reasonable requests, something the town should probably try and convey to DOT and work with DOT on. That being said, we've done a bunch of real estate work for DOT and their rail stations, and I'll be honest, economically supporting cafes or restaurants or delis in train stations is really challenging unless it's a really busy station. But that's not to say there couldn't be a little maybe convenience shop with coffee service or something. So I think those are reasonable. People had add-ins, and I give them credit for it. We ranked them, but not everyone did, so therefore we really don't have a good take on them. But clean bathrooms, I believe, is important, so I appreciate the person writing it in. The parking for Uber, I'm not sure it's needed. It's just any train station is going to have a pickup area, and I think Uber would utilize what the public utilizes, and then police presence. Rank community issues and priorities. So basically we tally out all the numbers that people, how these things get ranked. The lowest ranking or the lowest number value was quality of life issues. Therefore, it ranks number one. Highest number value is flooding, so it ranks last. The top three here, I think, are consistent with the other activities throughout this exercise. Quality of life, housing quality, parks and recreation. The parks and recreation is kind of interesting because it was a priority. It was the number one priority for kind of investment, even though people really appreciate it elsewhere in the activity, but kind of the recognition that there needs to be that this is important and we need to continue to maintain and upkeep these facilities and so forth. Most common words and phrases in our little Wordle games. Blighted, drugs and drug problem, and crime is the top three. And this, once again, is the quality of life issues, surfacing. The disinvestment in properties, and then the crime-related activities. I decided to leave drugs on their own as their own category, but I easily could have combined them with crime as the illegalness of them. But I also think we have to recognize the drug problem overall, therefore leaving them as their individual. And then when you just look here at these other words that were most commonly used, rundown, dangerous, gangs, neglect, all once again falling under that umbrella. And here's all the other words that were single words or phrases that weren't repeated like these, used to describe the existing conditions of Thompsonville. On the future conditions, I find it interesting. Safe and clean jumped out to me really quickly as just they are kind of the counterpart to that blighted and crime and quality of life issues. That in the future, if we resolve blight and we were to resolve crime, that Thompsonville would appear as safe and clean. So I thought that was very informative to get that kind of counter perspective in the futures. The walkability and pedestrian friendly kind of caught me off guard. I guess I wasn't expecting it because of the constant quality of life stuff throughout all the activities. But in the end, I think it makes sense. There already is a walkability to Thompsonville, and walkability and pedestrian friendly has become more and more important kind of in middle class America. And therefore, I think it makes sense that it was, one of the most commonly used phrases to describe future conditions there. And it's something to build upon. Once again, we have all these other one-off phrases that were used, words or phrases. So then the prouds and sorries, the vocabularies of pride. two themes, and that's where my shading is. Kind of this bluish color shading is this theme of history, historic character, historic homes. That historic context of Thompsonville really played out here as something that people are proud of. The other one was the public spaces. And I equate that also because our parks question with the voting with money also included kind of public space. And here we have town hall area, the green space, freshwater pond is all over the place in here. Forest and wetlands, parks, town green, just this theme of kind of these public spaces and the greenness of these public spaces, I think is important to note. Now, most interesting to me, as I've continually given you guys a hard time about housing, is Bigelow Commons. 6 people, or 22% in this exercise, ranked Bigelow Commons as a sense of pride. Wow. And I'm not surprised by that, in the sense that I've heard a lot of positive talk about Bigelow Commons throughout this whole entire process. But it's multifamily housing, which is something you guys have been less than excited about throughout this process. And knowing that currently, and I hate to bring up a ongoing development, but the opposition to the Felician Sisters property. So I want to pause here and actually pose questions back to you guys about this. What is it about Bigelow Commons that people like? Why is it successful?
Hey, Don, before you get that question for you, or maybe
Sure.
more of a statement, could there be confusion on how multifamily housing is, or multifamily housing development is defined, right? While I understand that Bigelow Commons is multifamily housing, I personally never thought of it as that. I consider multifamily housing as a duplex or a quadplex or something like that. So again, could there be confusion on the respondents or the participants on what really constitutes that multifamily housing?
I guess that's possible. I guess I'd be interested who shares Richard's perspective there, that multifamily is duplexes, triplexes, quads, and so forth.
I agree with you. Bigelow Commons to me is just an apartment complex, mixed use. It's lovely, it has nice apartments, but it's apartments with mixed use. It's kind of a transient population.
I think Bigelow Commons versus a multifamily such as a 2-family, 3-family also has affordability issue. Bigelow Commons is not really affordable for most average families. So that may also play a part in this equation.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think that regardless of what we each think is the definition, that we rarely define it in the conversation. And so people have different kind of mental models about what they're talking about.
Yeah.
Agreed. And I mean, that's why I like
Melissa, that was kind of my point as well, right? I mean, I live in Hazardville, and my definition, because I live on the Hazardville side, may be very different than those that live in Thompsonville, where multifamilies are much more common and prevalent. And again, how do we each define it may define how we answer this question.
Understood.
It was a good discussion, Richard.
Anyone else with thoughts? Because this is actually very helpful for me. So.
Well, I got a question. Bigelow Commons, how many 2- and 3-bedroom apartments are there? I thought they were all just single bedroom apartments. I don't know. That's why I never considered it like a multifamily housing, because a family, I would think you have to have at least 2 bedrooms.
Okay. I don't know the unit mix on Bigelow Commons. Lori, do you know by chance?
I do know that they've got 2 bedrooms. They may have some 3.
Okay.
But it's split between 1 and 2, though.
Okay. And that's pretty common in recent years, that leaning heavily towards 1s and 2s. So
Yeah.
Pat, did I see a
spent
hand
lots
with
of
you?
people there all the time, and I would see people playing tennis. I would see diverse groups, and I mean, I really think that, you know, these categories have, like, what you generated is really useful, but how we unpack them is what matters now.
Yep.
My perspective on Bigelow, living across the street from it and having known it for quite some time, is that Bigelow is a community within a community down here.
Yeah.
It doesn't mix entirely with the rest of Thompsonville.
Mhm.
It seems like it's a hamlet within there, but
Yeah.
it's an accessible, clean, safe environment that I think is attractive and gives an urban feel to it that a lot of young people are appreciating. I'm starting to see there's more venturing out from the Bigelow Commons of people. There's more walkers. There's more people going around the pond with their dogs. In the evening, in the early morning, I see a lot of joggers coming out, and you can almost tell that they live there. There's more people that come up to Coronas, come up and get their product up here. They seem to be venturing out. I think the nice aspect of Bigelow, and I do consider it a multifamily dwelling in my definition of what it is that that they see potential. People see potential for the area, and that they're as they venture out, as there's more quality of life places for them to venture out, like the Coronas markets or the Charapes, or it's the Mexican wagon, all those type of things. The pond is really well taken care of these days. That people start to use it and they're venturing out from Bigelow. I think it's a very positive thing for Thompsonville. And that's why you find it in there about the proud aspect of it. I think what people, because you see proud, you see things about that. Earlier you talked about potential, and I think the people that are down there see potential. It's also easily accessible for people. So in a lot of areas, finding good rentals. I mean, I don't know the demographics of this group, me being one of them. We're a little bit older, we're established in our residences. But I see young people have trouble finding good quality housing and rentable housing and things that are flexible for them because their work is more flexible than it ever has been. They're not tied to a building anymore. They have the flexibility to move. And I think Bigelow's are the type of places that allow for flexibility and accessibility. So that's my take on Bigelow.
Excellent. Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate that. Lynn, I saw your hand up and I want to give you a chance to speak since you took it down.
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to echo some of the things that Pat was saying, because I've lived in T-ville my whole life, and Bigelow Commons definitely falls under multifamily housing by my definition. I grew up right behind it. And it is like its own little enclave, a community within a community in T-ville. And I think that having lived in T-ville my whole life, all I see for it is potential. There's so much good about Thompsonville if we can just secure some stability for it, you know? And I think that as more young people move into Bigelow Commons and explore that kind of neighborhood around them, and I've seen more traffic at Corona's Market, and that's great. It's a local institution that's definitely needed down there. I think that there's a lot of really good things about Thompsonville, and I think that it is a point of pride to have, you know, the history of it down there and Bigelow Commons down there. And I just wanted to say that I really agree with everything that Pat just said.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate that. So let me ask a question, and I guess I don't know the status of the Felician Sisters application right now, and I don't want to put anyone on P&Z in a rough spot. So if it's an active application, P&Z members don't have to answer this question. But I'm curious from others, if Bigelow's Commons has been successful, what is the aversion or the concern with the Felician sister development, which would bring more apartments into the community? This is me really trying to understand, because my head spins when I see these things. So,
you know, one thing I think is somewhat confusing is that, you know, we keep talking about affordable housing, and that somehow we want to let the, you know, underprivileged people sort of develop into viable, you know, people as they, you know, get older. And what you have to realize is that, you know, if you sit around and you're paying rent for 30 years, you know, after 30 years, you have nothing. If you buy a house and you pay a mortgage, you know, after 30 years, you establish yourself a little bit. So it's somewhat confusing to me to say that, you know, geez, we want to help all these people, we want to help them get ahead. But in reality, you're not going to get ahead by renting. You're only going to get ahead by, you know, actually buying a house and investing in yourself rather than investing into for somebody else. And I think that, you know, it's somewhat confusing that, you know, we're trying to help them, but in reality, we're not helping them because we're not giving them that opportunity to stand alone on themselves and to invest in themselves.
So Richard, I agree with you to an extent, in just that investment in home ownership has been a foundation to kind of our American way. But in recent times, and especially with the declining size of households, with the continued increase in single and one-person households, the fact is not everyone shares that view anymore, and so many households opt to rent for various reasons. You know, we're not as sedentary and so forth. So we make these decisions for different reasons. So I do think, regardless of economic prosperity and what people can afford, there are segments of the population, regardless of prosperity or income, that make the decisions to be renters.
Pen or pencil? Can you?
Yeah, but I think that, you know, in terms of if somebody makes a decision to be a renter and they are, you know, prosperous and, you know, have, you know, a good paying job, it's their decision not to invest in themselves, because, you know, ultimately they're investing in another way, you know, possibly with retirement, you know, put asides and whatnot. But, you know, I think that, you know, I just see it as, you know, the fact that, you know, we developed this section of society that needs constant help, and in reality, what we're trying to do is make them self-sufficient. But in reality, we're not making them self-sufficient because they you know, they're not investing in themselves. And I, you know, and I hate to belabor that, but, you know, I think that, you know, it's true in terms of, you know, if you have a house and after 30 years of paying rent, at least you have, you know, $250,000 or, you know, $300,000 or whatever it is, you know, at least you have something. But in reality, then all of a sudden, you know, if you go, you know, into the hospital, let's say you have a disaster and you have nothing to fall back on, you know, all of a sudden you become awarded a state again, and you know, and it's kind of a vicious cycle type of thing, and it's kind of a pessimistic outlook on life in terms of, you know, people who, you know, don't invest in themselves. But I think that, you know, by investing in yourselves, you sort of improve yourself, and all of a sudden you sort of lift yourself up by the bootstraps rather than being awarded a state.
Thank you. In the order that I saw hands appear, I'm going to go Melissa, then Lynn, then Pat. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Yeah, having been a person who rented for a long time and now as a homeowner in a paid-for house, I think there are a lot more and diverse constructs of why people rent that range from not having credit to enter into a mortgage to not having stable enough employment to be sure of the possibility of staying in a place, to being psychologically disempowered in various ways, or to wanting to keep options open. And that, you know, I personally resonate to the idea of investing in oneself through homeownership, but to kind of generalize that people who are renters are kind of, you know, not stepping up in some way. I question if that's really fair or kind of empirically grounded. I think there will always be a population of people who range from, you know, recently homeless to recent graduate students who need to rent an apartment. And that is stigmatized in this community, or in a lot of this community, in ways that I think have to do with, understandably, a division. There are a lot of people in Enfield, including many in this conversation, who have lived in town all your life. And your reality is of extreme stability, and that's great. But the experienced reality of people who are dealing with extreme instability, you know, I would be really careful not to generalize that they're just not taking responsibility. I think there's an awful lot of reasons why rental housing is an important component of a community.
Yeah, and I'll just reiterate there, you know, especially in the new rental housing product market, which is expensive and far from affordable. You know, the going rate in Greater Hartford on a one bedroom, on a studio is about $1,300. On a one bedroom is around $1,600. On a two bedroom is around $2,000. And the three bedrooms start at like $2,500 and go all the way up to, you know, $3,800. The fact is, it's a very expensive market to enter into, and it's being driven by young professionals, 20 and 30 something year olds, who are typically single or two-person households. It's being driven by baby boomers who are downsizing and have decided they don't want to be tethered to place. They don't need the large house anymore. They want the flexibility and not having to do the care and so forth. So there's many factors out there that are driving it, and it's a very eclectic marketplace. Lynn's hand went down. I'll still give you an opportunity, Lynn.
Yeah, just to kind of build off of what Melissa said, which I also wholeheartedly agree with. I think it's also incredibly short-sighted to say that people who rent aren't investing in themselves when some people don't have the means, even if they're stable, to take care of a house. That's a lot of additional upkeep. It's assuming that you're able-bodied enough to mow your lawn and care for your house and fix small repairs. And some people don't have that know-how, or some people are disabled and just simply cannot do that. And one of the things that my partner and I are going through right now is that we are extremely in an extremely unstable to even look at some place to rent because rent is so high, as well as not being able to take care of the things that a house would need because both of us have been disabled by injury and sickness. So I don't think that I think that personally for me, while home ownership is great and it does grant stability, I think it's a little short-sighted and disingenuous to say that people who rent or don't own a house are not investing in themselves.
And I'm not really saying that in terms of, I'm just saying that, you know, long term, I think that what you have to do is look at how do we best improve people so that they help themselves. And that's the only thing I'm saying. So, and I realize that, you know, I rented at one time in my life, and you know, and I realize that there are significant different situations, but the fact that we keep calling something affordable to help people get, help themselves, in reality, we're not allowing them to help themselves, because they're always going to be dependent on somebody. And that's what I'm saying is that, we get this misnomer of affordable housing and how it's going to benefit everybody, but in reality, it really doesn't benefit. And there's always situations that, are contrary to what I'm saying. And I'm not saying that let's not have any, apartment buildings. Let's not have any rental areas at all. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying the big picture is that if you want to improve yourself, that's the best way to improve yourself is by investing in yourself. And whether you invest in yourself by not renting or somehow you can afford all that, it is what I'm saying is that, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get Thompsonville to improve. And how are we going to get Thompsonville to improve if everybody's just a renter there? The thing is, you need to get people who are owners there, not renters, because renters aren't going to improve anything. And that's the direction that we need to look at, is that, in order to improve, you have to somehow offer something to somebody for them to improve. And like you said, I'm not against renters, believe me. I'm not against apartment buildings. I'm not against anything. But when we talk about affordable housing, we should talk about how do we get, the people who need affordable housing to improve themselves. And that's the big picture. It's not this, the little, variations of everything. It's the big picture. What is the big picture? How do you improve yourself? The big picture.
So, Richard, I'm just going to say this rhetorically, and then I'm going to move on to Pat.
And I agree.
Because his hand was up. But at the end of the day, in the greater Hartford market, when we're talking about affordability, we're talking about 80% AMI and below. 80% AMI in the greater Hartford region is $75,000. We are not talking about poor people that need a leg up. We're talking about school teachers that can't afford to live in many communities. Or, probably the salary range, 80% AMI is probably higher than the salary being paid to your assistant planners and so forth, or to your starting police officers and so forth. So I think we have to be clear that there's a wider universe that's being discussed here. And my questions about Bigelow are really just about multifamily. At this point, I could care less about affordability. That's not to say that it's not playing into the plan and it's not important. But right now I'm just trying to get a grasp on, a positive view towards Bigelow while there's an overall negative view towards multifamily housing and housing development. So Pat next.
Okay.
And
so yeah, the conversation has kind of moved around since I raised my hand. I would just say, I agree with what you've said, Don. The point I was going to make is that, the way I look at affordable housing is not necessarily to bring poor up necessarily. It's to make it accessible to what you had just described, the teachers, the police officers, the fire, the working class that can't afford the economics of the region. And I think a lot has been because of short-sightedness and a lot of communities' perspectives about not allowing that type of development to take place in their community to allow for upward mobility, to enter into the housing market, to move their way up through the housing market. It's something that we haven't had in this region because of it's been stymied in many ways. I applaud what Melissa said. I'm glad that you said what you said about buying in. I know, Richard, you stepped back from and redefined what you had said, or clarified it, not redefined. So I'm not jumping on top of you in any way. I think that one of the things that we need to understand is that you guys made great points, both, I won't reiterate them, but one of the things we have to understand about young people is they have a different approach. Their approach necessarily isn't that an investment into real estate is the investment that they want to make. I mean, we can see it in a lot of different ways out there. Just take a look at, furniture, the type of furniture that's being bought. No more China is being bought. Silverware, those type of things that previous generations always invest in as a sign of upward mobility and moving along. And I think this generation, I can see it in my children, I can see it in their friends, investing in real estate has not proven to them that that's the proper investment. They'd rather invest maybe in different ways into their future. And they also are mobile and transient in their workforce, and they can want to have the ability to move along. And they're much more active than a lot of, they don't necessarily want big yards and lawns to take care of. They like to have different aspects of life. So I think we have to also understand that aspect. Your original question, let me move on from that, because that could be a debate that could go on back and forth for hours, right?
Thanks.
And that's not what we're here to do. You asked the question about what's the aversion that, at least my opinion, the aversion that we're seeing up on Enfield Street. And I lived on Enfield Street across the street from that development for 25 years. If I was up there, I probably wouldn't, and I'd be taking a closer look at it, but I think it's not, I think the basic premise I'm getting is not in my backyard premise. That's the difference between Bigelow and Enfield Street, right? There's a lot of long-term homeowners up in that region that are looking at it and thinking that, and I think this is a misconception, because even though I haven't been to all of your meetings, son, I have attended enough or read enough of what you sent out, is there is a misconception that putting in affordable housing, that, first of all, they don't really understand what affordable housing is. But as you put in affordable or apartments or things of that nature, multifamilies, that it lowers property values around where the development is taking place. And you have shown in your data that that is a misconception, complete misconception, right? They're worried about traffic up there. They, you know, but I think back when that was a full-scale school, and that was that had, you know, a couple hundred nuns that were living there as well, and was a real convent and a real community up there. That traffic was existing there anyways. So I think there's a misconception about property values being affected and about traffic up there. I will say, though, one other point that I've heard, and I think it could be a very valid point, is there are some very legitimate concerns about the developer and whether their track record is good. So okay. I think that could be a very valid argument on a lot of people that are looking at it much deeper than I am, because I'm not living there. But they want to see somebody, if you're going to do something up there, that they want to see a track record, and that it's just not a fly-by-night investment that goes bad. And then they're stuck with that up in that area. That's all I have to say about that.
Thank you, Patrick. Very helpful. Home helpers. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting your first name right now. So.
Peter, it's all right, Don. I just wanted to have a couple of comments, and I think Pat hit on it, and you did too. You know, when you hear affordable housing, it needs to be, you know, identified what that really is. That's for people that are making 40 to 80K, and they are that new police chief, that new teacher that's starting a job. Don't get affordable housing confused with subsidized housing. That'd be a whole different conversation that we would have. And about the young kids now, mobility, they don't want to invest in real estate. My neighbor's kids here are investing in cryptocurrency. I mean, the whole environment has changed, and that's just really two comments I wanted to share.
Yeah, one of the fascinating things with kind of young people spending different, you know, Pat mentioned the no silverware and stuff. They also don't buy diamond rings. You know, it's just like those things that prior generations held value to have just gone away, and it's something we've got to recognize. So I'm going to move on. You guys have been extremely helpful in giving some insights that I haven't previously had related to housing and the complexity of it. And I do recognize, you know, the vocabularies we use are all different.
Don, one thing on Bigelow, and this is from the perspective of someone, again, with the question on the multifamily.
Yep.
And maybe this goes to rental properties regardless. It comes down to the quality of environment that the landlord or the property owner creates, whether it's a homeowner or the Bigelow Commons folks, or even, you know, at the Nuns side, right? It's if the landlords and the property owners are taking care of the property, then the traditional property owners, the people who own the houses, will be much more satisfied with it than if they didn't. And I'll say I've always been impressed with Bigelow Commons, and I would say that I'm happy to see the positive nature of that. I don't understand the concern around the the other factor, only because I haven't been involved in it. But again, it comes down to what are the property owners doing with their rental properties, because you've got some great properties throughout Enfield, Thompsonville, and Hazardville, and you've got some properties that aren't being taken care of, that are blight, that have challenges that need to be addressed, that are pulling property values down. And I think that's a big part of, or the positive side of Bigelow, at least in my mind, and the potential issues with the nunnery side, that property.
Great. Understood. Thank you. So moving on to the sorries. Once again, I just felt this was overwhelmingly the quality of life issues. You know, blight, drugs, crime, and then a lot of the housing conditions, the rundown properties, blighted properties, declining properties, poor maintenance, all things in some ways that you just hit on, Pat, which I know end up playing into the concerns or aversion to new housing being built. The last was kind of the community assets. And once again, this came back to what I thought was featured in the Prouds. It's all around quality of life stuff. It's those public spaces, it's the historic context, and even stuff that I didn't highlight. Multiple times the July 4th celebration was mentioned throughout this, you know, these activities and so forth. What this provides me with, just so you know, is it provides me a firm understanding of what the community is kind of concerned about, and then what the community values in terms of what's working versus what's not working. And hopefully will help me translate that into some policy recommendations for where the town can intervene. Some of this ends up far harder than what a local municipality can do. I wish we could solve homelessness, as it came up multiple times throughout this. I'm not sure we have the best tools ultimately to solve it. That said, it does mean that we need to support things like our social services agency and, you know, providing those services to the populations in greatest need and so forth. So I say that to kind of manage expectations on where this can go. On the public space stuff, the historic character stuff, the housing quality, and even housing affordability, I think there's a lot of levers that local government has, and it has a role in ability to intervene and to make a difference, even in some cases if it's just at the margins, but in other cases can overtly you know, impact something. So with that, we're at 7:23. Like to keep this short, but I'd say let's wrap up at 7:30. But does anyone have any final comments, questions, anything they'd like to share at this point?
Don's Lori.
Yes.
I can't raise my hand since I'm the host. So
really, I didn't know
that. So I just have to chime in. So, you know, first of all, I think this is probably one of the best dialogues and thought-provoking dialogues that we've had this entire POCD time of working. I definitely think that we need to change the dialogue from affordable housing to workforce housing. And of course, Don knows that the planners have been trying to do this for years now, because that affordable housing nomenclature is is just it's based on the statute, but it really is that statute is based on providing workforce housing, as we all said. So for police, teachers, your hairstylist, the gas station attendant. I mean, these are the people that can't afford to have a 1-bedroom apartment, let alone invest in a house. So, you know, maybe that's where we need to start, is changing the dialogue and the definitions. But I thank you all for your comments tonight, because they were great.
Yeah, you guys helped me a lot with some of the nuance as to the challenge of housing. I know I pick on you guys and talk about this housing aversion and so forth, but at the end of the day, it's really me trying to understand it and get my head around it. And tonight's discussion was very helpful, and the honesty of everyone involved in that discussion was very helpful. And it shows A, the complexity, B, the diversity of opinions. I also just wanted to quickly thank Mike for his comment in the chat about new construction versus reuse. My gut was telling me that was potentially part of it, that Bigelow is different in that it was the reuse or redevelopment of an existing site and so forth. So I appreciate that insight, Mike.
Yeah, no problem.
I think the presentation is excellent. The workshop appears to have given us a lot of feedback from the community. So it was a good job done.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
And I think there were a couple areas that, and to Lori's point, that we need to have more clear definitions so that when we ask our residents these questions, they're answering the question that we're asking, and that way we're clear on the answers we're getting.
Yeah.
And it's tough to define everything. I understand that.
Yeah.
But again, something as critical as what we're trying to accomplish here. Of course, the other challenge is educating them on the definitions in a much broader sense. And we run into that across all the aspects of the town as well.
Yeah.
It's not just this.
And I get it, Richard. And at the end of the day, it's just the challenge of how do you define everything and even come to consensus on definitions. But getting the insights, recognizing, me coming to recognize that there's some of you who view 2 and 3, family units as multifamily, which they are, provides me with context I didn't previously had, because I'm kind of using a strict census definition of it's 5 or more units is multifamily. And we kind of refer to those 2s and 3s and 4s as missing middle and so forth. So it provides me context and it helps me. And it also clarifies actually something that someone said to me the other night in the meeting, which I just found it was kind of, I didn't understand the context of what the person was saying to me. And this discussion around multifamily has helped to better clarify that for me. So I appreciate it. Karen, did you have something, or is your hand just up?
Yeah, I don't know if everybody knows, but I invested in a 2-family house down in Thompsonville, and I renovated it completely right from the studs up. But I found that the ones on Russell Street, the houses there that were owner occupied were better kept up. They cared about their neighborhood. There wasn't a lot of riffraff hanging around and so forth. But a few of them, I talked to them about the loan program the town has to upgrade your house if you need a new furnace or whatever. And that was very important to them to keep it maintained. So, and a few people took advantage of that. So I think, the continuing with those type of owner occupied loan programs is important. And I think it's important that we try to push an owner occupied, because the 5-unit apartment with the absentee landlord is not necessarily the answer unless he's not absentee, because he doesn't go down there. He doesn't see what's going on. He doesn't see that the trash barrels aren't taken in. He doesn't see, he doesn't pay attention to that. He just collects his rent and puts it in the bank. So, the more people that pay attention to what they own down there, the more important it's going to be. And because on Bigelow, you have staff on site managing it. I would assume there's somebody there in an office that's managing the site, and they're keeping an eye on things. It's not that there isn't any crime there. It's, the police respond there just as much as everywhere else, but, it's a little more controlled. So I don't know what the answer is. I think the subsidized housing, if we're going to change that call it subsidized and not affordable housing. You know, there's a lot of apartments that have already been approved in Enfield for subsidized housing. And how much more do we need? You know, we need to weigh that against what's already been approved, whether it's been built or not.
You're breaking up, Karen.
I'm all done.
Thanks. Jeff, did you have, maybe it's me. Jeff, did you have a final comment or just your hand still up?
Are you talking about Peter?
I'm sorry, Peter. Oh, me and names.
No, I'm sorry. I'm not good with teams, so my hand should be down. I don't know how to put it down.
Okay. Okay. I just wanted to make sure. So you just
Thank
gave
you
me a
for
chance to blow your name again. So all right. So we're 7:31.
Hey, Don, I just,
Oh.
I did want to just say one thing, and Karen
Sure.
and Richard were completely correct. Owner investment, owner occupancy is always good for any neighborhood. That's what you want to do, but it's a matter of getting people to buy in and to move themselves into the neighborhood. And how do you do that? And what I really, I just wanted to make one last comment about this survey and what you went through and what you found is that I really believe, I mean, what stood out to me was that first slide or the first set of dots that talked about, I can't remember how it was defined, Don, but it talked about whether they thought Thompsonville was good or bad, whatever it was. And it really leaned towards the moderate to good. And I think that that is an impression. You're getting this from the people that live here, the people that work here, the people that occupy this area, that you're getting that impression from them. The problem is outside of it, as I've moved into here, and I tell people I'm living in Thompsonville now from where I came from, most people are, what's wrong with you, Patrick? Why would you move down there? You moved, why would you go from Enfield Street to Pearl Street, you know? And my experience has been completely different than what their perception is. I find myself and my wife and my family very safe here. I find myself as part of a community more than I was on Enfield Street. There are some really wonderful aspects as people move in, and getting the comments from the people that are here and the potential, not only the impressions that they have, but the forecasting for what they have for this area. And I think it's really inherent upon the town and us as a group, and whoever can do it, is to press that image outside of Thompsonville to the rest of Enfield, that there's not only potential here, but there's already a foundation here. There's already good. Does it have some bad qualities? Sure it does. It has the homeless. You know what? But they're not all bad. There's some great people down here that are homeless. I mean, there's some wonderful people down here that just for the grace of God go I, right? Most people are really, even the homeless and the, you know, the people that have substance abuse problems down here are very positive about what they see as the baby steps that are being taken place down here, about what's going on. And I think Enfield is doing my hat's off to Enfield itself and to our town manager and the staff up at Town Hall about what they're trying to do here by showing and putting their money and putting their actions, you know, ahead of them. Because moving Thompsonville forward helps Enfield move forward. Because now we don't have to pay as much attention to services down here. And we get in the type of, Karen, we want to get good investment down here. We want to get owner occupied people. Richard, we want to get people, improve the quality of life down here, show that there's progress, that there's potential, and it'll happen on its own because there's plenty of housing stock and plenty of opportunities for investment. And I'll shut up from there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Pat. I appreciate it. And thank you everyone for attending tonight. We'll see you next month.
All right, Don, I want to thank you and the Goldman and York team. You guys were great. You put on a great workshop, and you've been doing great work all along, but this was really stellar. And Denise and Elise, and you did a great job. So thank you for that.
I appreciate that. And I have to put the thanks on to Denise and Alyssa. They did an amazing job. And as always, my staff makes me look good. So I thank them and I thank you guys.
All right. Thanks.
Have a good night.
Good night.